Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode.
Welcome to this extra special edition. We're doing something a little different today, interviewing Sharna to hear Sharna's views on leading and following and leading. My name is Eran Magen, and I am very, very grateful for this invitation. Let me introduce today's guest, Sharna Fabiano. Sharna spent the last 25 years exploring a wide variety of improvisational art forms, mindfulness practices, and healing disciplines. Sharna helped thousands of people learn to dance, including me, and to tap into their own intuition and creativity. She received an MFA in dance from UCLA in 2014 and yoga and coaching certifications shortly after. Last year, Sharna published her first book, Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork, and also launched this podcast. In her coaching practice, Sharna helps people overcome sticky challenges in life and work and designs experiential leadership and followership programs for organizations. This year, Sharna became chair-elect of the followership member community within the International Leadership Association, a global network for those who study, teach, and practice leadership. Sharna is also a fun, gracious, and generous human being, and I think a real gift to this world and occasionally to me in my life. Welcome to your own podcast, Sharna.
Thank you so much, Eran. This is slightly surreal, but really fun. And I'm also grateful for the idea and to have the opportunity to talk with you again.
I'm really glad you're open to it. So this is to satisfy my curiosity mostly, but hopefully of interest to your regular listeners as well. I guess starting from the start, how did you get interested in leading and following?
Well, I have to say, for me, it really all started with social dance. I started my journey in social dances at 20 years old. I was still in college, and I didn't have any background in business or management or in an academic study of leadership, which is, I think, where most people start thinking about this concept. But I was an English major. I was a poet. I had become fascinated with partner dance while studying abroad in England. And that was the first time I started hearing these terms, leader and followers, over and over again so frequently. So because of that, for me, the idea of following or followership has never been new or strange the way it is for some who come through management or academic leadership programs where the education is very leader-centric, right? Following is, for them, this new thing. But for me, it's always been leading and following. It's always been both because I started in that environment of dance and then only much later extrapolated into other parts of my life. And I'll also note, I guess, that although I think leading and following is present and the lessons are there equally in ballroom, salsa, swing, any other partner dance, for me, it was really in the world of tango that I absorbed these deep lessons because I just threw myself into that world for so long. And I really owe most of what I know and who I am to that practice and to the tango community. So I'll forever be grateful for that.
Do you remember your first understanding of following and leading when you were exposed to it in tango?
I'll share the story of my very first tango lesson, which probably isn't what most people expect. And if anyone wants a longer description of this event, it's right at the beginning of the preface of my book, Lead and Follow. And I'll just remind listeners that this was 1997, and there were still not very many formal tango classes anywhere, nothing like there are now. So in many ways, you had to sort of stumble your way into tango by accident, which is exactly what happened to me. A friend of mine says one night at a swing dance, "Hey, there's this tango practice Friday night. I think you should come." So we show up, and he's also a beginner, but he takes me over to the side of the room and he gives me 3 instructions, which I have never forgotten. Number 1, give me a hug. Number 2, hold my hand. And number 3, now we walk. And even though this friend did not say the words lead or follow, he wasn't probably thinking of himself as some great teacher. I offer this as my first understanding of these roles through tango because I think the understanding was in my body. It was something I absorbed in that moment that I to this day believe is vitally important to the relationship of leading and following. It's something about safety, it's about connection, it's about acceptance, beyond everything, togetherness, and that everything comes from that. So his choice of pronoun here, I feel like, is very important. He said, we walk. We're doing something together with full consent and full agency. And I've never forgotten that. And everything I've learned since then, all the bazillion versions of leading and following have really all come back to that. And at some point, I think I realized you can't define leading or following objectively, but what you can define is the fact that these two things are in a continuous dynamic balance, like two sides of one of those old-fashioned scales where if you load up one side, then the other side goes up and vice versa. So I wouldn't say lead and follow always have to be weighted exactly the same way. It really depends on the context. But if they are unequal for too long, then the relationship suffers ultimately, especially if that unequal balance is made for some arbitrary reason like gender or a gender stereotype. So I want to here also give a shout out to my early teachers who showed me this by example, particularly by giving me the opportunity and encouraging me pretty strongly to learn and dance both roles. That I feel like I just was in the right place at the right time. I was given this gift and it was incredibly formative. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So thank you, Essa Dykes. Thank you, Neil Disco. Thank you, Brigitte Winkler, Daniel Trenner, Rebecca Schulman. Thank you, Valeria Solomonov, who you can hear from on episode number 1 of this podcast. And all of these artists, I have to say, were just so incredibly clear in their own embodiment of both leading and following roles and in their own physicalized practice of balanced relationship. So without them, I just wouldn't have had the path, and I certainly wouldn't have learned everything that I've learned through tango, and I wouldn't be offering what I'm offering today.
And so in terms of your interest in deepening your understanding and your involvement with following and leading, you said also this came from the work that you did with your teachers at the time and understanding where else it applies. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the where else it applies came much later. Once I had started actually teaching tango, right, not only exploring it for myself, I noticed there was a very recurring theme, and a lot of tango dancers, I think, will relate to this, where you're dancing, you're learning. There's a lot of awareness of these two roles and how they are interdependent and how they complement one another and support one another. And you almost can't help but start to see parallels in other parts of your life, right? Oh, as I focus on listening and attuning my attention to my partner in this way, if I do that same thing, with my girlfriend, boyfriend, or if I do that same thing with my coworker, boss, the conversation goes better. So I think that was kind of the first thing that happened, and it was still pretty intuitive at that point. I wasn't making a lot of connections academically, or in terms of translation, which I did much later in the book last year. So that was sort of the first phase. And then when I decided to go to graduate school in 2011, the program I chose had a very strong theoretical component. And so I was studying critical theory along with physical practice. And a lot of the things I was learning there enabled me to articulate how movement and dance in particular both reflects cultural values and social values and also creates social values and cultural values in the practice of it. So it's sort of a two-directional phenomenon, right? Both you're expressing something that had maybe existed before you, but also in the act of doing it, you have the opportunity to recreate that narrative, right? So a simple example is I can recreate the stereotype that I've heard of in my movement, or I can say, I want to create a different way of being a follower, a different way of being a leader. So I'm going to use my body to change the reality of my experience. So that kind of piece, I think, really settled in me in graduate school, understanding the magnitude of what dancers are doing, maybe sometimes without realizing it, on a like social cultural level. And then when I did my coach training, that was kind of the final piece, I think, in taking these lessons of leadership and followership and reciprocal support out into the rest of the world, because coaching is, again, about being aware of yourself, what you're doing physically, emotionally, mentally, and making choices about that to change the outcome. And so if you're doing that on a level of leadership or followership, in any context, at work, at home, with yourself and your art practice, you're methodically rewriting like your own ways of being and showing up and behaving in the world.
It sounds very organic. It sounds like almost like life stages, for a person. You start just kind of moving around, doing the thing, and then you learn how to move around, and then you start talking with other people about what it's like to move around, and then you start thinking about your moving around and its meaning and its consequences, and then you start planning how you want to be moving around in order to attain specific changes in the world, not just in yourself. It's this very beautiful, organic process of unfolding, or I guess immersing yourself in this line of this way of being. One thing you said about graduate school caught my attention too, that when you talked about how the dance is an outcome of the social forces, but also then generates a culture by itself, and it's a way to start influencing the culture that created it. And that in itself sounds like an interplay between a leader and a follower to me, and the way that following can change the leading and leading can change the following.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's especially a feature. I mean, it's a feature of all cultural forms, but particularly improvised cultural forms, because the technique of improvisation, whether in tango or another movement form or really any form, any practice, it brings you into the moment. And that's, the moment is kind of where you have that opportunity to make a change. I'm trying to make a link here back to just the tango world for those who are coming from that community. There is often this debate, between we'll just playfully call them the traditionalists and the innovators, the people who are kind of attached to the way things have been done or, want to preserve, there's like a preservationist impulse for all cultural forms. And then there's also this, invention and innovating and changing. And that's, I think, normal and natural, and they both always exist. And I do see that, as you say, a bit as leading and following. It's like there's a natural tension between leading and following forces, whether in ourselves or in a team, among multiple people. And so, I think what I learned and what sort of settled in me and resolved in me during those years of my MFA was actually it's both, right? Both are true all the time. And so I no longer felt a need to be on one or the other side of that debate. And it felt very much like when I learned to both lead and follow, I thought, I don't have to actually choose. I get to be both, and I can express myself in these different ways. And that just felt very complete. So since then, I see these sort of two ends, the preservation and the innovation, as just part of the same spectrum. And, sometimes I'm myself on one side and sometimes I'm on the other side. And as a group, we're always doing that, simultaneously doing both in the art form itself.
So a no thank you to the dichotomy, right? Saying actually these are two aspects of the same entity underneath, right? As opposed to two warring factions.
Yeah, and I would even say that is it's beyond dance, right? Dance, it's very easy to see it, but that's what we're doing as a society also, or as a team or as a company. Those two forces are always there as part of the same underlying totality.
Yeah, two expressions of one thing underneath. And is it fair to then say, well, leading and following also are two expressions of one thing underneath?
None of us are, 100% self-sufficient, right? We can't exist without one another, right? That's, I think, been well documented. And the nature of a relationship for me, right, this is like the language I use, is leading and following. It is intrinsically collaborative, right? Of course, there's competition as well, but in the bigger sense, there is kind of an ongoing working together, right? If you're not leading or not following, you're just isolating yourself, right? You're not collaborating at all. So if you're going to be with people in a company, in life, in a dance, like you have to either be in one or other of those roles in some way, right? And there's infinite number of ways you could show up as a leader or as a follower. It's not always the same. So yeah, in the sense that they both have to be present, right, in order for a relationship to exist, in my mind, then I suppose they are two aspects of the same thing if the same thing is togetherness.
So leading and following are both expressions of togetherness, of connection, of relating.
Yes, I think I would say that and stand by that. I'm just thinking of one of my favorite books, which is Powers of Two by Joshua Wolf Shenk, and he describes many, many well-known creative relationships, many in not just artistic realms, but other realms, sports and so forth. And even people we hold up as individual great artists or achievers have kind of an invisible partner that, was a big influence or a big reason that they succeeded.
Do you think of yourself mostly as a leader, as a follower, as the thing underneath?
I think once I reached an understanding of like what it felt like for me to be in the leading role, in the following role, and a comfort with kind of switching back and forth, whether that's in dance or in a conversation or in any other context, then it became like less important for me to like itemize cognitively, like, am I doing the leader role now or the follower role? And so I feel like I do have this comfort of like switching back and forth, and I tend to default to following. I've just found that to be most efficient. And I can't say for anyone else, but what I notice is that when people default to following, generally things go better. That more following or an emphasis on the following and then leading sort of as needed tends to be like the most effective strategy for most teams and groups in my observation. So I tend to default to following all the time. And then I notice if leading is necessary, right? It's at any point, like in a conversation or in a team, or, things are being done and say lots of people are like, oh, what about this and what about that? And I feel like this, and then no one's making a decision. I'll say something like, hey, okay, how about, can we agree on X? Shall we decide this is the deadline? And that's sort of me trying to insert a little bit of leadership into the group. This is a very iconic, I think, what should we have for dinner? And no one wants to make the decision, because, deciding is exhausting, right? And by the end of the day, you don't have much left for decision making. So there, sometimes I'll notice, okay, I have a little extra battery power. Let's have Vietnamese food, and then everyone's like, okay, great. The decision is made. So I think that's how I go through life generally, default to following. And by that, I mean listening, receiving, being with, and then have like a little part of my brain antenna up for like, when do we need leading here? If no one else is doing it, can I add that to make things move along better? And
did I hear correctly that your sense is that this is just in general good advice, a good principle in life for anyone? Like this feels like a fairly universal principle. Default to following, lead when needed.
Yes, I believe that to be true. Everything is contextual, but in general life, yes, that's what I observe.
And so you're defaulting to following. Is that a choice you made after deliberating about it and coming to the conclusion that that's the most efficient way to move through the world? Or is that also connected to, a personal tendency or a comfort?
I think it's probably both. I think it is a comfort. I like to be in the observer role. I'm a textbook introvert. I'm like the cat by the window looking out. I like to be in that position. And at the same time, the more I worked with people and groups, the more I noticed the problem came when there was like too many people trying to lead at the same time. And that happened a lot because I think, well, this is conjecture, but I'm guessing because we don't get any information about following in most areas of our education or work life, right? It's all leadership, and we're taught to be a good employee or a good student, you have to be a leader. And so, of course, we all want to be good. So we do leader-like things like taking charge and and proposing and kind of deciding. And there can only be one person doing that at any time. And so the problems or the conflicts or the slowing down, in my observation, always happened when like multiple people were trying to do that at the same time and not enough people were willing to follow. And so that's also a part of this way I see things now, is if everyone defaults to following, then we have that taken care of. And then, the leadership just happens as needed. And then in order for like a leader decision to have any meaning, it has to be followed, right? There have to be people willing to go with the decision. And so if that is the holdup, then that's, I think, why I say it's more efficient to default to following.
You mentioned how culturally a lot of us are trained to try to lead because there's more to be gained by leading than by following. What kind of rewards do you think happen naturally or in the current setup, of life as we have it now? What kind of rewards do leaders get? What kind of rewards do followers get?
Well, in a professional context, I think the most obvious reward that leaders get is more money, more, titles, right? I think that's primarily the current structure we have. The way to increase your salary or the way to increase your professional status is by getting another leadership title. I think that's the main thing. I don't know that there are many rewards offered to, what I would call being a good follower, other than maybe like you keep your job, right? Like, but there is an advancement attached to most following opportunities.
Yeah. So this sounds like a problem, right?
Yes, I think it's a big problem.
Right. Because the incentive structures are not there.
Exactly.
Right? People are incentivized to lead.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, though, about, politics is a special profession, right? You need to be a good listener to be a politician. You also need to be a good speaker, right? But in theory, to be elected democratically, you need to be able to say back what people want to hear at a minimum, right? Which requires, it's a lot of following before you start leading, right? And so you can get huge amounts of power, recognition, title, fair bit of money, directly and indirectly through the influence that you gain through all those things by following really focusedly in a sustained way.
So I'll amend what I said a bit. I think what happens now is people who are truly great at what they do and who advance, they are following, right? They're just not calling it that, right? They are listening. They are creating positive feedback loops. So they have these two skill sets, right? They're able to lead, by which I mean like make a decision, have a clear vision, like delegate. And they're also able to listen, respond to other people, get their work done, things I would put in the follower column. So they are, there is then, and it may be an invisible reward, right? But it's not named as following, right? It's actually all the good things are put in the leader bucket usually.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's back to this unifying thing underneath, right? Like you get rewarded the most when you can do both and switch flexibly between them. And you still get rewarded a fair bit if you're doing mostly leading with a little bit of attention to the world around you. And you get rewarded least when you're only following. Does that sound right?
Yes. And I think what I would like, and what makes this important for me is I want to acknowledge what's really happening, by naming it following. And, people can have a different name for it if they want. But by not naming it, then it's like becoming the most successful is actually not accessible. It sort of happens by accident or because a few people figure it out. But if you actually name, there's two skill sets here. To be good at what you do in any capacity, you have to have this ability to switch back and forth. If we just name those things and claim leading and following as equally important, then more people can learn both, do both, and we just get better outcomes overall.
In those situations, or for people in a leadership position, would you still advise the same? Follow mostly, lead only when needed?
I think it depends. And there's a lot of different kinds of leadership positions. I would definitely still insist that both are necessary, but the percentage might shift.
I'll switch completely now. Fade out, fade in, totally new scene, different part of the city. I can only imagine a lot of people are curious about this. I know I personally am. It's just like, how do you take all this profound material that you talk about and think about and teach, and just how it colors your own life? Like when you go to the park, when you are shopping for groceries, like what does it feel like to be inside Sharna's head and have this one lens on the right eye of following and one lens on the right eye, on the left eye of leading, and just see, do you filter the world differently, do you think, than other people? Are you attending to other things? What's it like to be you with all this in your head?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's impossible for me to compare what's it like to be me to anyone else, because I'm not in anyone else's head. I think that, just that idea of following first is kind of what I come back to. And sometimes it's not good to do that. Like I'm thinking now of just the funny example of grocery shopping, which I frequently do with my husband. And, he likes to have a list, go in, buy the things on the list and leave, right? He's very systematic in his shopping. And my tendency to follow first, right, is more like an open kind of observation mode. And so I tend to get distracted much more easily, like in the grocery store. And so I have to kind of actually decide in advance, I'm not going to do that, right? So that I can not spend 3 hours then in the grocery store. So that's like a case where I'm very aware of shifting my natural state, right? Because I want a particular outcome. Like we need more coordination, like more leader mind for this task than follower mind. I don't know, on the other side, if I'm in a park, like this is the two examples you threw out there, so I'll just take those. I think we do the opposite, right? Like my tendency is like, I want to be with the trees if I'm in a park. Like that's the whole purpose for being there. My purpose is not to just make it around the track, right, and go home. So there, I feel like I want to even emphasize that mode of being present and aware and listening. I'm not going there with like, okay, I've got 25 minutes, in and out. I'm going there with more time, flexibility. I'm just thinking because of my training, because of all the time that I've spent in this kind of improvisational dance world, in the world of mindfulness practice, thinking about what following means, in an embodied sense. I think I might maybe have more access to that mode than the average person, just because society doesn't train it. I kind of had to very deliberately spend many years putting myself in that mode in order to be able to have that openness. That's just a guess, because again, I'm not in anyone else's head, but I go through life maybe in a bit more like open, receptive state than someone who hasn't done like the same kind of training as me. That's a guess.
When you talked about your experience in the grocery store and your tendency to be open and receptive and follow the smell of the watermelon or whatever is there, even think about buying it before, and how you have to sometimes decide in advance that you are going to go in, out, do the things. It made me wonder about internal leading and following yourself and leading yourself. Because it sounds like, experience A in the grocery store is more like following yourself. You come in and you have an idea, but then this other, smell comes up, or a notion or a thought, and you're like, okay, let's do this. Whereas experience B is more like leading yourself. So I'm curious in general about your thoughts of how we talked before about how, if there's this root, there's a common root, and following and leading are two expressions of that root. I feel like now we're putting a cap where they also end up connecting to the same thing when it's applied to ourselves. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about leading yourself, following yourself, and, I'll add another little tack on it, which is who is the me when I say I'm leading myself? Am I the leader in that situation or the follower? And when I say I'm following myself, am I the leader or am I the follower? To my ear, when you say I have to tell myself to do it this way, the identification is with the leader role, and the actor is a little more external. And when I say, I had this thought, I came in here thinking zucchini, but now I'm thinking eggplant.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens to me.
And it feels like the impulse is external, and the choice to follow is the part that I identify with. So that's my snarl of questions at you.
Yeah. No, this is exactly what I contemplate often, actually. And I think I would relate to it most in my day-to-day work, because I work at home and I'm constantly kind of, again, steering myself. There's my internal leader between, a writing task, like an art making task, a podcast task, a coaching task. Like I have, pretty complex constellation of things as a self-employed person that I schedule myself through. And when I speak in that way, it's definitely my internal leader. And this is going to maybe sound like an oversimplification, but it sounds a bit like coming more from my mind when I talk to myself that way. Like I think of my internal leader more almost like in the left brain way. It's more like that kind of executive function type of command center, like cognitive making decisions place. And, I use that to like make my to-do list, make my calendar for the day, is to remind myself, okay, it's 2:00. It's time to do this now. And I rely on that, to have the kind of work life that I do. And, then there's the other side, which is, okay, once that's in place, I can't stay there. Because I have to then do all the things, and do them in a way that feels creative and generative and deep. And so as soon as I put myself in the chair, like at 2:00 to do, to edit the podcast or whatever it is I'm doing that day, then I have to kind of get out of that part of myself. And then I'm in the follower. And that, for me, feels like a much more whole-bodied self. Even if it's at the computer, like my hands are involved, the way I'm sitting is important. I have to be comfortable. I usually wiggle around and stretch, every once in a while. If I'm in the art studio doing things, that's also my follower self in action. So I know I might be standing at the wall easel, or I might be sitting working with different materials. It's definitely something I'm very aware of on a, sometimes hourly basis of now I've told myself with the inner leader what to do. And now I have to do it. And in order to do it, I have to be full-bodied in the follower me. I think that's the best way I can describe it. I'm sure it's not 100% accurate from like a neurological point of view, but I experience it that way, more like mind-based and like full-body-based.
For you, is leading and following, are they such essential forces, such, elemental components of connection, that there's just no other way of relating? Essentially, you're always either leading or following to an extent when you're in relation to anything, to yourself, to the world, to other people. Is there another state to be in, or is this really it?
Mark and Samantha Hurwitz wrote a book called Leadership is Half the Story. And they say if you're not leading or following, then you're not collaborating. And I agree with that. You're just not in the relationship at all. So it's as if you were on the dance floor with your partner and you just up and walked off and sat down. Now, I want to put a caveat here, which is that sometimes that is a totally appropriate response. We do sometimes need to exit an unhealthy relationship, for example. And on a slightly different scale, every person leaving their job right now in the midst of this great resignation is doing the equivalent of walking off the dance floor. They're saying, I'm not willing to follow this company anymore. And that's fair. But if you're not explicitly leaving a relationship and you're still checking out, then that's just not really a sustainable situation. Sooner or later, someone will ask you to leave or there'll be some other negative outcome. I would also note here that it's harder to check out when you ask this question on a larger scale. So you might be able to end your relationship with a friend or a romantic partner or with a company, but how do you refuse to be in relationship with, say, a nation or with the planet? I think it's a much more difficult and involved question. There's a great episode, by the way, with Tara Laidlaw earlier in the podcast season where we chat about how to be in a healthy lead and follow relationship with land. It's a beautiful episode and, of course, an extremely critical question right now. So I encourage you to listen to that and give that some thought. But at this big scale, I think I have more questions than answers right now. So like the citizen, for example, is the follower, right? On a civic level, on a national and a state and even a city level. So I'm asking myself a lot, like, how am I showing up in that role? Am I intentional in that choice? I don't know. I think it's something, I would encourage us all to think about.
So in an interaction between any two people, let's say, to keep it really simple, is as long as they're engaged, is somebody leading and somebody following at any given moment?
I think it's possible for both people to follow at the same time, but I don't think it's possible for both people to lead at the same time. With both people following, what I notice, and this is again back to my conviction that following first is more efficient, generally speaking, is that when both people follow, like one another, say, at some point, either leadership will emerge, meaning both people are kind of following the same concept or the same idea without having to say it, or someone will gently lead, right, by like saying something or walking in a direction or something will happen. So leading frequently emerges from following. I notice that a lot in a very organic way. And even with large groups of people, this, phenomenon of, sometimes they're called leaderless movements, social movements, but really there is leadership. It's just a leadership that's emerging from masses of people following the same idea or the same impulse. But it doesn't happen the other way, not in a very healthy way. Like if you have 10 people trying to lead at the same time, they might like fight it out and dominate one another. And then you have sort of followership by coercion. But this is not, in my mind, like healthy or productive for anyone. And so, that might be like one way of saying there's a difference between a democratic hierarchy versus like a dominance hierarchy. And the democratic hierarchy is the one I'm advocating. Everyone's following and then you lead as necessary.
Well, one of the things I'm getting from your answer is that to take a simple situation like there are two people doing something, often somebody's leading and somebody's following. It does not work at all if both people try to lead at the same time. And it can work quite well for neither person to lead and maybe for both people to follow intentionally or unintentionally until a need to lead arises. But a follow-follow dyad can still work well.
Yes, I think for a period of time, yeah. Contact improvisation is another partnered dance form. It's frequently described as two followers. And what you're following, what the two people are following in that case is where the weight is going, of the two bodies. So you're following momentum, or you're following gravity, or you're following the dynamic of the movement itself through space. So there is a leader. It's just the leader is not like an individual human. It's a kinetic phenomenon. So in that case, you have two people following first, and then sometimes you would lead if there's like a safety concern.
Is it possible, in your opinion, to lead, purely lead, without following anything?
Yes, but not for very long. This is pretty abstract, so let's just try to put it in context. So say you're, a team leader and you have 4 people on your team and your job is to set the agenda or set the plan. You can do that. Maybe you spend an hour making a plan and saying, here's the plan. But no plan is perfect. And so if, at the end of that meeting, if you don't listen to the feedback of your team members and say, oh, well, this number 4, actually, that's not possible because we don't have that machinery. If you don't listen to that feedback, things are going to go badly, right? And so, yes, for an hour you can lead and only lead. But if you kept doing that and just, steamrolled, then inevitably things would deteriorate. And I think that's probably the case in every context.
I wonder also about the internal aspect of it, right? Can we generate anything out of nowhere, de novo, or is it the case that whenever, a tyrant issues a decree, that tyrant is still following something internal happening or even external in the world and responding to it, a threat, an ambition, a childhood experience. Is it possible, I wonder, to only lead, to just generate without, in a sourceless way?
You make an excellent point. Yeah, I don't know that I would say for myself I've ever made a choice that's uninfluenced by something, whether that's a past belief, or my own history or an external circumstance. Maybe it's back to our bias, right, toward leadership, and we think, oh, leading is primary, but perhaps actually the following is primary, right? That we're always responding to something, we're just not aware of it. And in many practices, mindfulness included, and coaching and so forth, the more you're aware of what you're responding to, the more then you can have different choices. You can say, oh, I'm responding to that. Good that I know that. I'm going to respond to something different, right? Which is basically just changing your following allegiance. Like, oh, I've been following this old belief I have that I'm not worthy. Like, I don't want to follow that anymore. I'm going to follow a different one. And based on that different choice of what I'm following, maybe now I'm following a belief that I am good enough. That's going to be what I'm following. And based on that, I can choose, right? Which is like then leader self, a different course of action.
Where do you envision your work on leadership and followership going? What are the next things to be working on and to be watching for?
Well, the piece that I'm working on right now is in the context of work. And because I see this, leadership and followership really as a paradigm, I think it could appear in lots of different contexts. That's the one I'm working on right now. I think there is an abundance of, sort of dominance hierarchy type of thinking, in the corporate world especially, and in the world of just organizations where most of us work every day. And I would really love to introduce these ideas in that context so that the way people work together can change, right? From like this leader-centric model to a partner-centric model. And I think that could produce a lot of pretty radical changes, back to this reference we made earlier of how people are compensated and incentivized. Like, I think it's worth reconsidering that. We're in a moment where a lot of people are changing jobs, kind of questioning their own priorities. And I think a lot of it comes down to this quality of relationship that has just been taken for granted for so long. So I would like to present a way of not only thinking about that, but actually training. Like, if we can think of professional development training as living in these 2 separate modes, leading and following, then it starts to become okay to follow each other at work. It's not that we only have to be striving to be the leader all the time. If we're only defining good as having a leadership role, that's just inherently problematic. Like, what's everybody else going to do? And how can everyone else feel good and fulfilled about what they're doing? Like it seems really silly to me. So can we rewrite that script and normalize following as something everyone should be doing all the time, and then leading as necessary? And then we could maybe share the leading.
Last question. Probably most people listening know you and admire you already, but maybe they're missing a corner. So where are all the places that they can learn about you and your work?
Well, I put everything on my website, as probably everyone knows, sharnafabiano.com. The podcast is available everywhere. I've always welcome feedback, so please write to me anytime. Let me know what you think, what else you would like to see in this kind of conversation. I have a couple of group workshops that are kind of tangential to leading and following, but are kind of designed to nurture your creativity and introduce some kind of basic coaching practices in a easy 1-hour workshop sort of way. So those are also on the website. So I'd love to see you in one of those.
Are these in person or online?
These are online.
So accessible from anywhere.
Accessible from anywhere, yes.
Including Denmark.
Right. Time zones notwithstanding.
Yes. Any last thoughts to share?
I think I just want to, and everyone listening knows me probably, so this, may be redundant, but I just want to encourage everyone to celebrate following, and if you still stumbling over that word, give yourself another word, support, perhaps, partnership. Embrace that. We've been taught for so long that this is the inferior state, and it's not only untrue, but it's dangerous. If you scale this up from work to family to governance, it's dangerous to consider anyone as inferior to anyone else for any reason in any context. And it may sound not so dire if you're talking about like a work day. Oh yes, of course I'm a subordinate worker, right? But that thinking is, when it's scaled up, the same kind of thinking that is present in supremacist institutions, for example, right? It's obviously much more violent there, but it's the same sort of thinking. And so when you reclaim the role of follower and partner, what you're doing is you're actually upsetting that dominance hierarchy. You're actually creating a new way of relating that's more equitable and less supremacist. So I know that's sort of a big leap, but I do feel like the kernel is the same. So know that it's really like noble work to reset these roles, because they ripple through every facet of our existence together.
Sharna, thank you for this really wonderful experience of getting to dive into your head and swim around a little bit. It's so nice to hear you thinking, and so enlightening to hear the both the subtleties of your thinking on leading and following, but also the very clear big picture framework that you fit it into. It's amazing to me how you keep this focus on the micro and the macro, right? The individual and the societal at the same time. So thank you for this great opportunity. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you, Eran. And I think the podcast interview format is a sensational example of leading and following. And you're an exceptional partner. And I'm always amazed how new ideas emerge from this relationship. It's one reason I love doing this. So thank you so much for the suggestion.
Next time, Sharna's back in the driver listener seat.
Till then. You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music, and a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.